What happens? Someone clicks apply, sends their resume to Amazon. What happens next?
Once you click apply, usually the respective recruiter on that team, they will then compare to whether there's any like internal candidates, referrals, because usually they will prioritize the internal referrals first. And
why strong candidates still get rejected?
So for a lot of the engineers, hundreds of engineers I hired, usually the strong candidates who did not pass the loop is because of.
Okay, so that's how it happened. Tell me about the bar raiser. I've never heard that from any Fortune 500 company I've worked with.
Bar raiser is one of the best things I really enjoy. It's a mandatory interviewer on the loop where they basically make the hiring decision with the hiring manager. The bar raiser can also.
What about like AI rewriting resumes? Did you ever reject someone because you're just like, this is just ChatGPT nonsense coming at me here?
I think everyone, now we're in this AI era, everyone can use AI to polish their resume or get it formatted, great. So now I would never thank someone for that, but it's when.
And what about career gaps and what that structure looked like? What is Amazon paying some of these roles base? You need a filtering process. How did the AI screen? What can people apply? All right, guys, if you've ever wanted to be hired at the behemoth that is Amazon, we have a treat for you today. Today's guest, Tony Yang, he spent 10 years hiring in the tech department as a principal recruiter there. He now started his own business, Liminality. He's going to tell us all about that, but he's going to give us an insider playbook on how to get hired and where good candidates go wrong at Amazon. So Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, so obviously we have a lot to talk about. People have a lot of questions on getting hired, and the big salaries and stock options associated with working at Amazon is something this channel is all about. So why don't we just go through the process very quickly? What happens? Someone clicks apply, sends their resume to Amazon. What happens next? And let's just speed run through that.
Sure. So let's use like an engineering manager, as an example. So once you click apply, usually the respective recruiter on that team will see your application coming in. And once it comes in, they will then compare to whether there's any like internal candidates, referrals, because usually they will prioritize the internal referrals first. And usually the hiring managers will look at the internal first just because the onboarding process or the interview process is more condensed. But then let's say if there's no internal roles, internal referrals, matching that role, then the recruiter will then bring that profile and start looking deeply into that resume. So if it passes a resume, then the recruiter will pick up the phone and send an email to the candidate and arrange it for what we call the recruiter phone screen. So the recruiter phone screen will last about 15 to 30 minutes. Just really digging in on the candidate's experience and, really asking for some examples in terms of what they've done in either current company or, previous company. And then once the recruiter feels confident that this is the right person, then they will then push the candidate to what we call the technical phone screen. And the technical phone screen then is where the candidate will have a 1 hour deep dive conversation with an engineer or another engineering manager on the team. It's not going to be the hiring manager 90% of the time because we want the hiring manager to be on the actual loop, for the on-site interview. So once that interview is completed, the interviewer will have 2 days to share the feedback in the system with the recruiter, say whether they're inclined or not inclined. And then it could be inclined for this role or inclined for another role on another team, but not for this position, or it could be inclined at a different level. And usually it's going to be a level below the original level that this person applied to. So for example, if they apply for a level 6 role, the person can come back and say, I don't see this person as a level 6, but more of a level 5. You might want to look for, asking the recruiter, you might want to look for a team who is hiring for a level 5 engineering manager. And once that clears, the candidate then will receive a communication from the recruiter. And if it's going to go to an on-site interview, then the recruiter will let them know, collect their availabilities. And usually it will take about 1 to 2 weeks to arrange that because it is 5 interviews. And we want to make sure all interviewers have the right, availabilities to have the availability to chat with the candidates, and then the candidate also needs to give their availabilities, at that point. And usually before the first interview, the recruiter and the candidate will jump on what we call the recruiter prep call. And that usually lasts about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on the position and depending on the recruiter themselves as well. Some people like to share more, some people just share the basics. And the candidate will receive some documentation to prepare. For example, for an engineering manager role, you will need to understand like system design. And we have PDFs, on that, right? To really go over what to prepare for the system design round. And then you go through your actual 5 interviews. And after your last interview, the loop will get together what we call the debrief, and you will have the candidate will receive an answer within 5 business days in terms of whether they are inclined or not inclined for the position. And if they're inclined, then we move to the offer stage.
Okay. Okay. So that's how it happens. Now, you did a talk at NYU recently. You mentioned why strong candidates still get rejected. Why don't we go through that? Where in that process are they falling short that you've seen typically?
I think usually the strong candidates are the ones where they're very strong technically. So for a lot of the engineers, hundreds of engineers I hired, usually the strong candidates who did not pass the loop is because of the behavioral based questions, the leadership principles. Usually they are so good at the technical where like that's a slam dunk, really, very strong technically, but it's usually with the bar raiser. It's usually with the folks that are not in that engineering bucket when they start really asking them behavioral based questions, how they think, their process, their judgment, their decision making. Those are the parts, usually the engineers, or the candidates, they fall short on. And it's not because they don't have the experience. I think it's more about they couldn't communicate their examples clearly or show their examples that they actually did something impactful. And that's why they fell short and not got an offer.
What would be an example question that gets asked, and what would be kind of a mistake that candidates make in their communication of it?
Yeah, I would say definitely like a lot of the times ownership is one that comes up a lot. And when you ask the candidate, tell me about a time when you own something. Let's say you own the code, you ship the code, and what else did after you ship the code, what else did you do, right? Or something goes wrong. Um, the candidates fall short, like the answers that sometimes I hear a lot in the interview is, oh, I rely on the product managers or the program manager. Like that's not my responsibility. I'm more like just owning writing the codes. And that separates between someone who is a B player versus an A player where they actually own the code, they continue to test and debug, or they proactively work with the product manager, say, hey, how are things looking? Like it's that behavior which is very hard to teach. It's like it's either innate in you or you definitely need a lot of guidance and practice, over time in terms of, being able to communicate that in an interview, especially in a 1 hour stressed, stressful environment.
Okay, and you mentioned bar raiser there. I know we talked a little bit about this before the interview started. Tell me about the bar raiser. I've never heard that from any Fortune 500 company I've worked with. Obviously, it's something different than Amazon does. So, what exactly is that?
Yeah, so bar raiser was one of the best things I've really enjoyed putting that hat on, during my 10 years there, at Amazon. So bar raiser essentially it's a mandatory interviewer on the loop where they basically make the hiring decision with the hiring manager. The bar raiser can also be the only person who can veto a hiring decision based on how they think that interview goes. So the bar raiser it's a kind of like a third party person who is not within the immediate interview team or not even within the same organization. For example, I'll give you an example. Let's say if you're doing like an AWS interview loop, the bar raiser should come from, let's say, from retail, from consumer, from ads, like someone different from the organization, because they're there to make sure biases are, we don't, they're there to basically remove bias, unconscious bias, recency bias, you name it. And making sure that the hiring manager is not hiring just for the sake of hiring. And I think the most important thing about bar raiser is they are there to make sure you hire for Amazon and you're not hiring just for that team.
Okay, so you acted as this bar raiser, right? So they pulled you into interviews in other departments. They just want someone outside of the immediate group they'll be working on. Were you ever in the position where you flipped the room, where everyone were thumbs up, and you said this person won't work for Amazon, or the opposite? Was everyone a no, and you said I think this person would be a great fit for Amazon?
Absolutely. A handful of times because I served as a bar raiser for 6 years, and I remember one distinctively. It was with AWS when we were hiring for a senior program manager person back then, and everyone was inclined. I was like soft, not inclined. So when we went into that debrief, and when I dissected each interviewer's feedback, everyone's yes, they're inclined, but it was very like lukewarm. Like this person was good, but so then as a bar raiser, then I need to start diving deep into how were they good, right? And I really pushed each interviewer whether they were able to extract examples, like for example, on ownership, were they able to own this? And then I asked follow-up questions in terms of, well, did you push this person, in that way, right? And get the answer. And interviewers like, no, I actually didn't get that. And then, so then once you kind of went over with all the other four individuals, everyone started realizing, yeah, this person was personable, this person communicated well. But then once you look at the data, it wasn't really there. Not saying that you're a bad candidate, but that person didn't really raise the bar for that particular position. And as Amazon, we always want to make sure hiring someone from the outside, you need to be 50% above, better than the current population in that particular role, right? And then I always ask that question, especially to the hiring manager, like, are you confident this person that you're bringing in, they're operating 50% better than the current, let's say, current engineers or current program managers on your team? And when I asked that question, the hiring manager kind of was taken back and really thought through and be like, Tony, you know what, I actually don't think so. So that's when the entire room then flipped. But they all came in and climbed. But then that bar raiser, that debrief I was making, I really need to make sure, like, were they really excited, or what does this person really demonstrated like raising the bar attributes, and they in fact they did it.
Yeah, and did this often throw candidates for a loop when all the questions were coming from people from, that would be working on that team, and then you came in as the bar raiser? Were they like kind of taken aback on some of your questions because they were probably going to be totally different, right?
I wouldn't, because, well, I mean, the recruiter will prep them, and usually all recruiters will tell the candidate that there's going to be a bar raiser. And I think now people know, like, Amazon, there is this bar raiser person. They're going to be asking more like the behavioral based leadership principle questions. So I think the candidate will come in with an expectation that the bars will be asking something more, kind of more on the, the way how they think, the way how they look at situations, and more on the behavioral base. And I would say 70% of the time now, candidates will kind of know like who is the bar raiser, because usually we all kind of give an introduction to the, to the candidates. And then and let's say I'm from this team. And then if you're not from that team, then the candidate will probably know like, oh, now this is probably the bar raiser.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the loop. Right. So it's 5 interviewers. One is obviously the hiring manager they'll be reporting to. One is the bar raiser. I'm assuming at least one is the lead, or someone will be a coworker or a senior person on the team. Who are the other 2? Are they just other members of the team or other higher level people?
Other members of the team usually, or another higher level, in the sense that usually we love to have the hiring manager's manager as well, on the loop. Just to make sure that they're also aligned to whoever this person is bringing in. But usually the 2 other folks are immediate team members, but then they're going to be in a different function. For example, it could be if you're interviewing for an engineering manager role. Usually, how we set up the loop is the hiring manager. There's another engineering manager, on the loop, and then a technical program manager, someone you work closely with, more on the program side, and then could be a senior engineer, like really digging in on your system design experience, and this person could be potentially reporting into you, so senior engineer, and then the bar raiser.
And how does it work from there? Does it have to be 3 yeses, 2 no's? Does it have to be 5 yeses, 0 no's? Is it a consensus? What is it?
I mean, if everyone comes in on incline, the bar raiser still needs to do the debrief. But I would say usually those debrief, if the data, if the written feedback are very well laid out, very detailed, then 95% of the chance it's probably going to be inclined, right? When there are no like huge risks. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if it's like 5 all non-inclined, then maybe it's the bar raiser will still hold a debrief, but we still want to see whether this person should be hired for, like, maybe if they interview for the wrong role, like this is probably not their best role, but if they have like really good leadership principles, then we kind of we recycle them to another position, right, based on the interview. Or they could be really not for Amazon at this time and they just need to come back, and sharpen their experience and come back another time. But anything in between, it can really go both ways. Like sometimes four inclined, one non-inclined, it will still turn out to be non-inclined. And then sometimes it's like four non-inclined, one person inclined, everyone will change their votes to incline. So it's very hard to determine. There's no correct recipe in that, but it really depends on each interviewer's feedback and how deep the bar raiser drills.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, one thing I wanted to ask you. So you were at AWS when it scaled from 550 people to 2,250 people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
I mean, what was it like dealing with that crazy volume? It just must have been just working nonstop on these interviews and
Yeah.
candidates, correct?
Yeah, well, those were the best times because I was, it was just me and another manager and what we call the client lead, the three of us really building out Canada. And at that point, it was like every they were trying to expand in Vancouver. The Vancouver is their next big market in Canada, and I resided in Vancouver, so I was so excited. I know a lot of folks, bringing the talent in. So I think it was busy, but it was like really exciting to really build out that site for Amazon Web Services.
Yeah. And then let's talk about the leadership principles. I know that's a big thing with Amazon. Again, that's another thing that's a lot different than these other Fortune 500 companies. I don't really hear them really state their leadership principles. So what were those and how can people go about, maybe impressing Amazon to in these principles?
Yeah, so we have 16 leadership principles, and essentially it's basically evaluating you, how you think, how you decide, how you make decisions, how you make informed decisions, how you calculate risk, and, do you have good judgment, essentially. And then last but not least, I would say, how do people perceive you as if they can work with you? And are you someone who are, receptive to feedback? Because we always want to hire people, not just based on their technical capabilities, but we also want to hire people who have the potential to grow, in their career at Amazon. And in order to have that potential, you need to be able to work with this person, and this person needs to be receptive, to their manager's feedback. So essentially, I would say the leadership principle is in every Amazonian's DNA, that if you don't have these leadership qualities, it's going to be very hard for you to grow within this type of environment.
Okay, so was there one leadership principle that people were tripped up with the most, or was it, was there one thing that really just gave people a hard time?
I think for senior candidates, a lot of the one that really resonated with me that they don't do well is what we call "are right a lot." And "are right a lot," a lot of candidates will think when they share their example is when they were right. And actually, no, that's not the case. Like when we start asking "are right a lot" question, we're looking at your judgment, and we really want to hear from examples where you made a decision, but then you realize it's not the right one, and then you course corrected, and that through that process, we want to see why did you course correct, how did you realize that was the wrong decision to make, and then what was the new results, after you course corrected that decision. Like that's actually the pattern that we're looking for. So it's not about you sharing us, and a lot of candidates they misunderstand that, and they share an example where they made a right decision on they made the right decision. They use the example where they made the right decision, and then in that interview, as a bar raiser or another interviewer, we will kind of dive deep on that, and usually that's when they get nervous, they get anxious, they feel like, oh, I answered this question wrong, and they completely, it's kind of like they're kind of caught blindsided in a way.
Yeah. So you really have to like, are they tested on all those leadership principles, or is there really, can they decide which ones that they really kind of vibe with the best, or how's that work?
I wouldn't say we'll do all 16 because in the limited time we have, but just for everyone's information, that we do hold pre-brief right before the interview. So the bar raiser conducts a pre-brief where they want to ask the hiring manager what are the top three most critical leadership principles. Like that's going to be the first question. If the candidate doesn't raise any of this, then that means it's going to be a no hiring, no matter how well they do on the other ones, right? So in that pre-brief, which usually it's 30 minutes, the bar raiser will ask the hiring manager, okay, you need to assign, you need to take care of these 2 or 3 leadership principles. Bar raiser usually takes 3 as well. And then the more like the individual contributor interviewer, depending on their role, like they need to be assessing the technical hard skills, as well. So we usually give those people 1 or 2, depending on their seniority. If a more experienced interviewer, they might take an extra leadership principle, and then the lesser one will probably more focus on doing the technical aspects, and then maybe just ask 1 leadership principle question. But then each leadership principle question that they ask, they will be asking like 2 or 3 questions just to assess that 1 leadership principle.
And is there a way, obviously answering those questions wrong, the leadership principles could tank your application, correct? But could you nail the leadership principles? You ever see someone just, man, they give great answers there, but they still didn't get the job for some reason?
I think there is a fine line between genuine examples versus perfectly crafted robotic examples. I think that's where we still see candidates not getting an offer, because in the debrief, one, if they share the same examples, like perfectly crafted examples, but then they kind of like apply that to all leadership principles, those are the ones we still pass on, right? We still want a variety, and and then at the end of the day, interview is a human to human conversation. And if an interviewer starts raising their hand, saying, hey, I felt like my interaction with this person was very robotic. It seems like a lot of their answers were scripted, or, it's like they memorized the answer. And then once you have that pattern, other interviewers will speak up, and then the bar raiser will ask, do you see that? Or, share their own sentiments. And then if we all come agreement that, yeah, like this person's seem like their responses are very scripted, then we hesitate because we don't know whether this person can actually be who they are on the job, because this is we only got 1 hour with him, and we don't want to take that risk, right? To hire this person who will come in and be not able to actually be who they are and demonstrate who they actually portray who they were in the interview, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, so then, what about before they get to the interview? The AI resume screening, obviously you guys probably get millions of applications, right? You need a filtering process. How did the AI screen? What can people apply to their resumes to kind of help them, and what should they avoid that will hurt them?
Mm-hmm. So resume, from a recruiter lens, we really make sure that your resume should be very clearly formatted. It should be 1 page. Unless you have a decade more experience, then you can go on to 2 pages. But general rule of thumb, if you have like 10 years of experience, like it should be fully like just 1 page. And you definitely need like a summary profile, in terms of like it's kind of like a LinkedIn biography, like about me section, but more in a succinct version, like really talk about who you are, how many years of experience do you have, and what are the key technical skills that you can bring to the table, because that's where the ATS will scan right from the get-go if you hit the basic qualifications. And then it should be your work history, and followed by your current position, listed by, I would say, 3 to 5 bullet points. And your first bullet point should be the most important accomplishment or impact that you've created as an individual contributor or a people leader, whatever it is. Like that should be in your first bullet point. If you don't get that, if you don't have that in that format, easily the ATS could just screen you out, from the get-go.
So I mean, how many resumes are screened out before they even get to someone like you?
I would say out of 10, prior to my time leaving Amazon, when we were implementing more AI screening, like maybe one or two will come to me. So like 80% will be screened out usually of the time. And that's because, and sometimes it could be just that volume of batch of resume, like they're just not formatted correctly. But there could be chances where, strong candidates will apply and you might get, 2 out of 5, from that batch, right? But I would say in general, because a lot of people also mass apply to Amazon, like they send their resume to, let's say 10 to 20 plus roles, which I highly recommend to not do that if you want to get an interview at Amazon. Like that's the worst that you can do, for your candidacy.
Okay, so it will detect that he's applying to
Yeah.
multiple positions at Amazon.
Now there's a number that we can see as a recruiter, like if this person already applied to Amazon over 100 times, and those are to us like candidates that we tend to avoid from.
So you've mentioned the 6-second resume in the past. What does that mean, and what are you looking for right off the bat to kind of, as an immediate no? Like what are something? All right, it passed the AI, it got to you, but what are you looking for right away to kind of maybe reject someone?
Right. So if the job description says a senior engineer, and if I don't see that senior engineer title or something equivalent, like very close to, I basically reject you right away. So it's the title, and it's not necessarily the company. I think for me, it's more like the title and also the first bullet point, like what are you building essentially. And if I don't see that, I will basically go to the next resume.
Well, speaking of company, was there any pattern as far as companies? Was it just as simple as other FANG companies that did really well in the Amazon interviews and at Amazon, or was it just a mixed bag and based on the personality?
I think it's a combination. Obviously, when you see big titles that say coming from Meta, Google, like you will, as a recruiter, you will stop and be a little bit curious, like, why are they coming from our competitor or something, right? So you will give that extra few seconds, extra glance. So it does help if you do come from, let's say, a big brand. But mostly for me as a principal recruiter, I really look at the title, and I will do my research on the company. If I see that you have good bullets, I will look at whichever company that you're coming from, and I will not filter you out just by company, right? And even if it's a startup, like I always feel like the best engineers were the most talented people. They come from that type of environment because they are builders, and they're just not someone who just writes code. Like they actually are more innovative. They're just not a cogs in the wheel, let's say someone coming from a big tech. But the title has to be there, and the key skills have to be there as well.
Yeah. And what about career gaps? Is that something that's filtered out? Is that something that when they get to you, what's a good way when someone gets to you, they have a career gap, maybe a few months, maybe even over a year? What's a good way to kind of finesse that situation when they start talking to someone like you used to be?
For me, once they pass my initial assessment, even if they have a career gap, to me, a career gap explained is a career gap forgiven in my dictionary. It's only when they don't explain that career gap, where they try to avoid, where they try to hide it. Like some people might not, write it on their, not have it on their resume, but or vice versa, not on their LinkedIn. Like recruiters are smart. Like we will go through your career history when we're planning to push you through the process. So if you be more upfront and tell me why there was a career gap, if it's not a red flag, where it's not, if you don't come to me and just say, oh, just because I don't want to work for 2 years and I just wanted to do whatever, then that could be a red flag for me. But if you have a legitimate reason, like whether that's a leave of absence, or you just want to spend more time with family, or it's a sabbatical, like those to me are like legit, like very reasonable gaps, and I would never not push someone just for that. But it's the ones where they try to avoid or they try to hide it. Like those are the ones where I don't even bother bringing up, and I would just filter them out.
Yeah, and you would recommend them not, especially when you're applying to Amazon, you would recommend them not lying about a gap. I've seen some people recommend they extend their tenures. It's all going to come out in a background check, right? And then you have to explain why you lied or you overlooked it, right? So,
I feel like once you let's say once you lie, you're gonna keep wrapping up. There's just gonna be more lies afterwards, and you just need to like keep covering up your lies. And the moment when something flags in a background check, and then to the hiring manager and the recruiter and the bar raiser, it's an immediate red flag, like what's going on here, right? So and then it actually tarnishes your entire reputation within Amazon. I would say that's probably applied to other companies as well. Like basically that you're not able to reapply to this company in the future. So why would you sabotage that?
Yeah. And then what about what about like AI rewriting resumes? Obviously, you probably can use that a little bit. Did you ever reject someone because you're just like, this is just chat GPT nonsense coming at me here? Like, let me just move on from that. I mean, where's the line there? Obviously, AI can help kind of align your background to a job description. I recommend people do that. But if you go too far, it can look bad for someone like you, correct?
Right. I don't. I think everyone, now we're in this AI era. Everyone can use AI to polish their resume or get it formatted, great. So now I would never thank someone for that. But it's when everything is written by AI, you can really tell, especially from an experienced interviewer or experienced recruiter, you can tell if this is solely written by AI or is this resume templated by AI, but there's a lot of personalization and you're still adding in a lot of your own tone, your own voice to it, and not using like very common buzz keywords that you see across all AI-driven resumes. So that's the differentiation. I'm not saying that people cannot use AI, but I think you use it as a first benchmark, but then you do need to customize it and tailor it to your own language and own voice. Or I think another thing people might just screen you out is you have this AI resume, but then when the recruiter actually calls you and dive deep into your experience and you're not able to fully explain what you've done because this was all AI written, then that's another signal that you're not the right candidate for this role.
Yeah. Well, let's make people a little money. I mean, let's talk about offer negotiation. I know that's something you have touched on and you help people out with at Liminality. So offer negotiation, they get to that stage. Where have you seen people get a few extra dollars, or where have you seen people cost themselves some money at that level?
Right. I would say be very don't waste each other's time. Like when the recruiter will definitely ask you what's your expectation for this position, right? And obviously, if you're comfortable sharing what you're making now, go ahead. But they're never gonna ask, due to legal reasons. But you should be very clear right from the get-go, like this is your range, and you need to commit to that range. A lot of candidates start changing numbers throughout the process or throughout, like once they get an offer, they're like, oh, now I want more. Then you lose credibility. So either you do your homework right from the get-go, like this is the range. If the recruiter can't meet you, then maybe this is not the right role for you, right? Or if they can, then commit to it. And if they're able to give you that range, then it's more about, okay, is it more on the lower end, or is it middle, or is it more on the upper end? And that's where you get more. I think through conversation you can see from the hiring team whether, and it also depends on your interview performance. At Amazon, like if you're like a strongly inclined person, they'll probably put you more on the higher end.
Right. And so every job at Amazon comes with a range. How big is that range that you were dealing with?
It's the base salary is the part where it's very limited, right? And that's where a lot of candidates struggle, and also when recruiters struggle as well, because we all want more cash, like right from the get-go, which is our base salary. But that's exactly where they put more limitations on, especially post-pandemic, and especially now we're all going through, a lot of companies are restructuring. The base salary is the one where they put a lot of parameters on, and you do need a lot of approvals to go through if you're able to get you at a certain number. Where there's more flexibility is going to be the sign-on bonuses. That's where a lot of people will get most of their extra few grants. That's where they, where they get it from. It's the year 1 and year 2 sign-on bonuses. Even the RSUs now, I would say the shares, the Amazon shares, it's also not as, I would say it's not as attractive as it was, 5 or 6 years ago. It's definitely, it has shrunk a bit. Plus, our share price, have gone up, over the years. So I would say if you're a candidate now applying for Amazon, you would definitely get most of the leverage from the sign-on bonuses.
Okay. Now, why don't you walk us through maybe one or two roles that you helped fill, maybe some of the more common ones, and what that structure looked like. What is Amazon paying some of these roles base plus a typical bonus plus the RSUs? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, for like a typical engineer, let's say SDE2, like that's the most common roles at Amazon. Where I think it also depends on the geography, right? So if you're like in the premium markets like New York, San Francisco, or like Seattle, you're probably looking at a base around like I don't know whether they changed, ever since I've left, but like you're looking at around like 180, like minimum 180 to like 220, 230 ish, for base. But then, and then sign-on bonuses, you might get another, let's say, 80 to 90 grand, for year one or year two. Obviously, the year two salary will be slower than year one because everything's relative, right? And then the RSUs that are vested over 4 years. So usually I would say like you might get a total compensation for engineer like SD2 with like 4 to 5 years of experience, roughly around like I would say on the higher end like 280 to 300, on more like the mid end like 250 ish, right? Depending on where you are, and it also depends on like sometimes it also depends on the hiring team. Like if the hiring manager vouches for you or you bring in something very unique or what you demonstrated in the interview, that's where they will work with the recruiter and help you write kind of like what we call internally like offer justification template. Offer justification, where they basically write a one-page thing and send it to the human resources business partner and compensation team to see why this person deserves that money.
Yeah, it's great money for you said 4 to 5 year software engineer. What technologies typically were you filling for that level?
Like mostly backend, mostly full stack backend. Front end engineer has more like a different, I would say different band, but those are more like typical backend, engineer full stack.
So let's talk about your story. You founded Liminality. What exactly do you help people with along this process? Is it just like you're helping them step one to hire? Is it only Amazon? Is it, all big companies like that? Like, how are you helping them?
Yeah, well, the reason why I founded Liminality is now I kind of want to give back to the community, and now using my decades of corporate recruiting experience and, obviously a huge chunk of them with Amazon, like I want to help candidates because I know there's still a lot of candidates out there, job seekers out there who are very confused in this whole process. And especially now compounded with AI, compounded with major layoffs, like there's a huge talent out there that are looking for jobs. So I kind of want to bring my expertise to really help them just make their, I would say, job seeking journey there's more clarity to their job seeking journey, and at the same time add a little bit more insights and fun along the way, because with a lot of people right now just using AI to write resumes, but at the end of the day I still believe that you do need that human guidance, especially people who have that experience can really guide you the right way, like what to invest your time in and what not to waste your time on. So that's kind of why I founded Liminality. Like that's why I founded this company, because I wanted to help candidates, and kind of like change my lens now. Before it was about helping corporations like Amazon to bring in best talent. Now it's like helping candidates to land their dream jobs, essentially.
Yeah. And who exactly is the ideal profile of someone you like to work with? Why don't you just kind of like lay it out for them to see?
Yeah.
That's them. And we will have, of course, all of Tony's links and links to Liminality in the show notes below.
Yeah, I would say candidates who are ready to really commit to the process and work with me, and someone who has strong ownership, someone who's very intellectually curious as well. I think those are the behaviors that I would love in terms of for my clients. And then I would say in terms of like where you come from, the background. Obviously, tech, coming from tech background is the sweet spot. Like if you're an engineer, technical program managers, technical product managers, engineering managers, you name it. Like those are my sweet spot. But anywhere from non-tech or tech, I'm open to, that profile. I think my clientele right now ranges from, graduates, like people with masters or PhD graduates looking for their first, let's say their first industry professional job, or they want to land an internship at a big tech, all the way up to, I would say, 9 to plus 10 years of industry professional. So job title should be around that senior engineering manager, position. Like those are going to be the clients that will definitely extract the most value out of me.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, listen, if that's you, definitely reach out to Tony because, this guy has more experience, on the inside than anyone. I mean, a lot of people talk about being able to help people get hired at fan companies, but not many have 10 years experience actually doing it from the inside. So definitely reach out to Tony if that's you. So Tony, listen, any last words?
I would just say, as a general advice for all job seekers out there right now, like keep doing what you're doing, be intentional of what you apply to, and obviously use AI to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, you still need to add your own personal brand, tone, voice to it to really make you shine in interviews and distinguish yourself from all the other candidates out there.
There you go. Yeah, this was great. This is a great tutorial on the inside track on getting into Amazon. So Tony, thanks so much for making this happen, man.
Of course. Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Yeah, awesome. We'll catch you guys next time.